With lesson 4, we're going to talk about some of the recommended treatment protocols that are suggested. So what I want you guys to do is to click on this website, apa.org, PTSD guideline. You'll see that connection down there in the bottom of the slide. Follow along with me. Now, this is a fairly lengthy 139 pages. First of all, no, I don't expect you to read through this whole thing. We're going to highlight a couple of key elements out of this, though, for discussion points. You'll see in the listing there are several specific treatment protocols in this slide. What I'd like you guys to do is, and whether you follow along with me or not is fine, look, when you do open up this website, go to page 4, and you'll see recommendations. So this was, again, a document put together specifically to address PTSD, and it provides some specific guidelines for how to do that. So on page 4, let me get there again, sorry. Okay, so actually it's not even page 4, it's page, this is where my own, there it is, page II. Anyway, you'll see there at the top it says recommendations, okay? So it says the panel strongly recommends the use of the following psychotherapies / interventions. And these are all for adult patients with PTSD. So here's the ones. I'm going to just read through these real quickly, and then I'll talk about a couple of them, especially the ones that I have used throughout my career. Cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive processing therapy, cognitive therapy, prolonged exposure therapy. And then notice it kind of shifts. It says the panel suggests the use of brief eclectic psychotherapy, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, otherwise known as EMDR, and narrative exposure therapy. And then also notice here they also say there is insufficient evidence to recommend for or against offering seeking safety or relaxation. And then it goes through medications as well, which I'm not really quite as interested in terms of going through the medications. But what I would encourage you to do first and foremost, read through parts of this document. Obviously, there's not a requirement in this class to read through the whole thing. Would you benefit from it clinically as your career develops, as you develop your own skill set? Absolutely. So please take some time, scour through this, dig through the parts and pieces that are of greater interest to you, especially regarding building your own skill set. And with regards to a skill set, you'll notice at the top of the slide that we're addressing here, it says meeting your client where they are. As a counselor, you are very much walking into a relationship with a client and you have your own set of skills. So if you want to picture in your mind carrying in one hand your toolbox, in that toolbox are the varieties of different skills that you have learned or are developing that you can utilize with your clients. It is essential as a clinician you be aware, one, what your own beliefs are about the world, what your own beliefs are about human functioning, what your own skill sets are and are not. You should not, as a counselor, be attempting to utilize a skill, any one of these, if we look at these recommendations, that you have not been trained in using. Training can vary in terms of how best to utilize these approaches, but I would certainly highly recommend, and it's an ethical issue, if you try to use a clinical approach that you have not been properly trained in, okay? So, in your toolbox, you walk into that relationship with the client, you're going to use the tools that you have developed or that you are in the process of developing. Motivational interviewing is one of the most amazing skills that you'll ever develop. It is not a specific therapeutic treatment. It's not like cognitive behavioral therapy. It is not prolonged exposure. But what motivational interviewing is, it's a communication skill set. It's a skill set that you can use in every single interaction you have with anybody, whether it's in a clinical relationship or in the relationships you have outside of a clinical setting. So you walk into that relationship with a client, you've got your toolbox there beside you, and you start that conversation and you build, as I mentioned in the earlier portion of this lesson, the alliance. You are building an alliance with your client. Hopefully you have that environment that is conducive to treatment that provides them a sense of physical safety and psychological safety. You're building that relationship with that client in such a way that helps them feel safe, helps them feel that it's okay to talk about whatever issues may be on their mind, helps them feel supported, etc. And as you build that relationship with them, it will come to your mind what type of clinical approach you may want to use with this client, whether it be cognitive processing therapy or prolonged exposure therapy, or if you are trained in using something like EMDR, if you use EMDR as a clinical approach in helping them deal with their trauma. Okay, so overall, what I'd like you to walk away from in terms of this lesson, one is that there's an awful lot for everybody to learn. There are a lot of tools, there are a lot of great interventions that are proven to work, that are evidence-based, and that's something you'll hear time and time and time again as you work in this field. Use evidence-based approaches. Use evidence-based approaches. Evidence-based, evidence-based. You're going to hear it time and time and time again throughout your career. And it's essential that you use these types of skills because they do have the substantial evidence, or shall we say, theories behind them, and times of being used in treatment, studies performed, etc., that back up their effectiveness. So that's one thing. I want you to walk away with the notion that there are a lot of things out there. As you develop in your career skill set, you're going to want to be researching some of these things. Some of these approaches you may look at and go, hey man, this is perfect. I really want to learn this skill so I can utilize it with my clients. I will give you an example of a skill that I do not use. It doesn't fit my style, and that is dialectical behavioral therapy. DBT. There's absolutely nothing wrong with DBT. DBT is well researched. It's established as something that absolutely can help clients, but it's not something that matches my personality and the way I want to interact and work with the client. So I have made a professional decision that I don't want to use DBT, but I will share with you a couple that I have used here in this list. I have used and continue to use prolonged exposure therapy, and I have been trained in and have used in the past EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. These are clinical skills that for me are invaluable. They're amazing skills. EMDR is extremely structured. You have to be in the right environment to be able to create that one-on-one relationship with the client. You have to have that physical setting where it's quiet, where there's a lot of safety around for the client, as well as just to help set the ambiance, if you will, for the environment for treatment. And because of that, there's some issues that I have in my current working environment where EMDR is not really a good option for me. Prolonged exposure therapy, though, on the other hand, not nearly as structured, can be utilized in probably a wider variety of therapeutic settings, both physical settings as well as emotional settings. And those are things that I use with some regularity, especially PE. So read through these. Go through these types of treatment recommendations that are out there. I would, again, highly recommend you go through this clinical practice guideline. There's a ton of information out there, and you might find something in the reading that might be on a quiz or a test. Just letting you know. So that would conclude that little piece there. Let me just wrap up this lesson. So again, specific principles. These define trauma treatment in environments conducive to healing. That was in the first part of lesson number 4. And then the second part here we just wrapped up by looking at some proper treatment approaches that are evidence-based. That's your takeaway for this lesson, okay? Now let's get into the discussion topics. So topic 1, define a few of the most important aspects of providing care for victims of trauma. So this is going back to the first section of this lesson. So go back and look through those that list of points that we brought up and discuss them. Pick out the ones that you think are the most important. Obviously, they're all important, but I'm interested in hearing your take on the ones that identify more closely with you and how you would create, whether you're creating a private practice or if you're working in a community setting or a jail setting or like me in a prison setting, etc. How would you incorporate these into creating a safe environment and an environment conducive for trauma treatment. Topic number 2, discuss clinical approaches when dealing with a client who has suffered trauma. Whether you pick one of those clinical approaches or other clinical approaches, something that you've looked at before, other information that you might have researched that you think would be very helpful that is evidence-based, bring in those things into this second topic as well. And I look forward to interacting with you as you answer these discussion topics. Thanks, and that concludes Lesson 4.